Folks, I see you survived your first day of high school. Good stuff. Only 179 days left. Sometimes I just have to get outside and get away from everything and kind of listen to my thoughts, clear my head, that kind of thing. You ever feel like that? Well, I just need it sometimes, and it's really great. I mean, there's no aggravations, there's no noise, just nature. There's no stress, no rules. It's just perfect, right? In fact, there was this English guy in the 17th century. His name was Thomas Hobbes, and he called this type of atmosphere the state of nature. It's sort of like just the absence of government. He was really referring to an absence of any type of rule structure way before man-made government was in place. And so, as I'm out here right now, it's enjoyable, it's nice, it's peaceful. But if a bear was to walk up behind me, and you'd tell me, right? You'd start screaming. That would really ruin my Zen moment for me. So, it doesn't always pan out perfectly. Bearkind and mankind sort of have to have a working agreement, and we try not to mess with other species, and we sort of share like a mutual terror of each other. And in a way, there's a structure of government that keeps us safe too. When one of our species breaches an unspoken contract, sometimes either somebody gets mauled or an animal gets shot. So there's some type of a bad result when we go outside of those parameters. There was this guy named John Adams, and he once said, "To be free, one must be chained." So think about that quote for just a second. To be free, one must be chained. Does that sound like doublespeak, or is there something legitimate about that quote that you think has a nugget of truth? I know it's popular in middle school and in high school to see people doodle an anarchy symbol, the A with a circle, maybe at the bathroom stall, or maybe on their notebook, and raging against the machine and down with the man, those types of ideas. We're going to talk about plenty this year, and there's an appropriate time to champion revolution. But anarchy, or a state of nature, may sound enticing, but it can be really an awful and terrible thing. And what I mean is that if there are no rules, no one telling me what to do, I'm able to do anything that I want to do to anybody. The extreme of this can be pretty detrimental. And just hear me out on this. I mean, if I want to end someone's life, no consequences, I have total liberty to do that, right? The only problem is that in a state of nature, no one has restrictions, and so that if somebody else wants to come in my life, then I'm not going to be too happy about that, obviously. So if we're able to continue this trend where we can do whatever we want to do and, let's just say, end as many people's lives as we want to, eventually we end up being, or someone ends up being, the only person in existence, which is going to lead to a very boring life. It just doesn't work. The state of nature doesn't work. So this guy Hobbes I referred to earlier, he wrote down these same ideas in a book that he called the Leviathan. And in case you've never heard of that term before, a Leviathan is a sea monster that is described in the Hebrew Tanakh, or the Old Testament, the books of Job and Isaiah. And so Hobbes basically said that government can be terrible, it can be scary, but it's a small thing to suffer compared to the alternative of not having any government at all. And he encourages us to give up a little bit of our freedom for our own good. So it's sort of like a contract. We agree to follow certain rules and certain rulers, and in return, the ruler or the government that is over us will take care of us. So to be free, one must be chained. So if we really want to enjoy our liberty, we have to hold back at times. There has to be some type of a trade-off between freedom, between our government establishing order, and also everybody experiencing equality. So that's what governments basically do. They exist to try to balance or establish a balance between those three values of freedom, order, and equality. And what makes every nation on the earth different is how they decide to reinforce one value at the expense of another. So they have to make sure that their formula is just right pertaining to what it is that they're trying to accomplish in the end. So what is it that we as citizens of the United States and as citizens of other nations, of other countries, try to do is we submit to the nation's sovereignty, or the nation's right to rule them. Now, this does get sticky at times. And today, if we turn on the news and watch an international correspondent for long enough, you're going to hear about the citizens of Egypt. And in Egypt, the people of Egypt, through a military coup, have just overthrown their former president, Mohamed Morsi. And Egyptians would say that Morsi violated their social contract, or they violated the agreement that the government would take care of the people and the people would follow the rules. And so the Egyptians would say that revolution is the only result. It's the only answer, only way to end that violation of that contract. Another sticky issue is when a ruler who has national sovereignty, remember, is questioned and even invaded by another nation. So if you think back to Libya and Muammar Gaddafi, or if you even think back to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, there were a coalition in both situations of nations who determined that regardless of the ruler's sovereignty inside of the nation, those actions were deserving of an outside global intervention. And so it can be a mess, and history is a lot of times the judge as to whether or not the intrusion was justified. I almost forgot to tell you guys something. Somebody has a birthday coming up next month. That's right. It's not, actually it is me. It's my birthday too, but in September is what I'm talking about. September the 17th, the Constitution is going to be 226 years old. And everybody knows that once you're 100, it's really hard to find somebody a gift, so I've just given up. But anyway, you may have wondered before, what's the big deal about the Constitution? And the reason that it's such a big deal is that it is the United States, it's our unique flavor of order, freedom, and equality, per James Madison's recipe, the guy that wrote the thing. And our flavor is called democracy. So the dilemma that Madison rolled out when he rolled out his idea was basically just balancing freedom and order. And these guys were essentially just asking, how much power should the government really have? How much do I, an individual, really have to submit to the government that's above me? Now today our dilemma is a little bit different. And our dilemma today is really just focusing on, and what I mean today, the modern age, is the balance between freedom and equality. And your Janda book, your Janda reading, chapter 1, mentions that these two things may sound like they're the same thing. And they're really not. There is a difference between freedom and equality. For example, right now, if an army chaplain is approached by a homosexual soldier for counseling, the chaplain may want the freedom to choose to counsel or not to counsel this soldier. And regardless of the chaplain's desires to have the freedom to choose, the chaplain must treat all soldiers equally, regardless of sexual orientation. So there's just a small example of that. And if that doesn't make a lot of sense, we can talk more about the difference between freedom and equality tomorrow in class. So let me change gears for just a minute and talk with a bigger scope on political spectrum. As I mentioned earlier, every nation has a mix of freedom, order, and equality. And there are names for these different categories, these different mixes, and they're called political ideologies. So if you'll look at the image that I give you, it's on the webpage on the PowerPoint for Unit 1, kind of towards the first section. There is a slide that is called the left-right political spectrum. And the term left-right, it really just derives from the French Assembly many, many years ago, where it was indicating where someone sat in the room. But when we're speaking about the United States, that's not as big of a deal as to where the term derives. Speaking extremely loosely here, though, like in very general terms, the further left of center that someone goes, the more one prefers government to control economic matters. And then the opposite, the further right of center that one goes, the more one prefers the government to control social matters. So that could be dealing with ethical considerations. Sometimes maybe you could replace that with the word moral considerations. Now remember, this is a loose rule, okay? And there's always exceptions. But if you go to the extreme on either end, what you experience is tyranny. You experience some type of a terrible representation of what the contract should be between citizens of a country and the ruler. And if you go even further out, you have chaos, so you do have anarchy. There's an absolute absence of government. Most Americans are in the middle. And what the two terms in the middle are called is American liberalism and conservatism. On the global spectrum, they're really not too far apart. There are definitely differences, and we'll outline all those differences later. But just speaking big picture, most Americans are somewhere in the middle. Now, on this spectrum, if we start from the left, and we've already discussed anarchy, but if we start at the left and then move towards the center, we hit communism. In a communist state, there will be a violent overthrow of the pre-existing power, and the state controls the means of production. It determines the distribution of wealth and goods. Moving to the right a little bit more, in a socialist state, there's no violent overthrow. Okay, this is a very important difference. There's not a violent overthrow. Instead, the method of governance, of distributing wealth or means, that's voted in democratically by the people. So instead of overthrowing the means of, or instead of the government owning the means of production, the people do, and the people decide how it's redistributed. Okay, now give me a second, and I'll come back to liberalism and conservatism. I'll talk about that. Moving on over to the right, though. Monarchies can vary widely, from little control to basically totalitarianism, or you could replace that with tyranny, total governance. Anything further to the right of a monarchy places total social control in the hands of the state. So these would be matters, maybe deciding, the government deciding what is morally right, what's morally wrong, who is allowed to live within their country or live at all in some situations. Those would all be decided on a far right totalitarian state. So now let's look at the narrow middle. I have another chart, if you go to the next slide, that shows conservative, liberal, libertarian, and statist or authoritarian. Now, what doesn't show up on this chart is communitarians, and you can see them discussed in your Janda reading. These would basically be centrist, moderates. These people are truly in the middle. Now, what my chart indicates, if you look at the dollar sign, looking down on the dollar sign column, that means that people who approve of the government making decisions about economic matters would place a check in that column. Okay, this might be taxes for ridiculous things, or it might be things that actually benefit society, like public education, what you're experiencing right now. It might also be public roads, public parks, libraries, hospitals, etc. The smiley face stands for government being involved in personal decisions on your behalf. Now, this could be limiting stem cell research. This could be defining marriage. This could be prohibiting abortion, etc. Things that are more personal decisions. Now, again, I'm speaking very, very generally, very vaguely here, and there, again, are many exceptions to the rule. But these four categories can be explained by placing either an X or a check, yes, no, in each column by the row of the category of political ideology. So, for a conservative, let's look back at your chart. Flip on over there if you have it nearby so that you can follow along with me completely. For a conservative, they would not be in favor of the government making financial decisions generally, but they would be okay with what's known as the government making moral statutes, saying that this is morally right or this is morally wrong, even possibly having constitutional amendments or state statutes to back that up. Now, for a liberal, just flip it. For someone who is liberal, they would see merit in the government deciding how best to spend tax dollars, but would not see the role of the government as one where the government decides what is right or wrong for a personal, for an individual person. Now, for a libertarian, and this is different than a liberal. A libertarian would say no to both. They would say that the government does not have any need to make decisions on my personal behalf, and they should not decide on what to do with my taxes, that I'll decide, or my finances. I'll decide who and what to give my money to. Then finally you have a statist. So just flip the libertarian and you have the explanation of a statist or an authoritarian. The statist thinks that the government has their best interest in mind, and they would feel comfortable placing full economic and social governance in the hands of whoever and whatever ruler is over their nation. Okay? So this is just a primer. Tomorrow, what I want to do is I want to let you take the world's smallest political ideology quiz. And don't worry, you don't need to study for this. It's not something that you're going to get graded right or wrong for. It's your personal opinions on some different issues. And then what I would like to do, I want you to take a personality quiz also. And you're going to be in a category along with different people based on your personality. And what I want to experiment with is see if your political ideology can be predicted based on your personality type. And we'll start putting you in groups and see if there is a correlation somewhere. It might be completely unfounded, and maybe there's no way to predict someone's political ideology based on their personality type. Like, for example, are most very driven people libertarians, or are most very driven people authoritarians? We'll see. Maybe it differs class by class, so maybe we can't make any type of a general statement, but we'll find out at least how our AP class pans out tomorrow. Okay, so if you have any questions, bring them to class with you tomorrow. Remember to do your Janda reading if you haven't already, and catch up on any other pre-assignments. I will see you guys tomorrow. Good night.